inside the sterile halls of the Countess of Chester Hospital. The neonatal unit functioned as a sanctuary for the most vulnerable. It was a world governed by the rhythmic chirping of monitors and the soft hum of incubators, where the air felt thick with clinical precision and parental hope. In this delicate ecosystem, nurses were the guardians of life's fragile beginnings. Among them, a young 25-year-old nurse named Lucy Letby moved with a quiet, unremarkable efficiency that earned the trust of both colleagues and families. To those who worked alongside her, Letby was often described as beige. She was professional, dedicated, and seemingly tireless, frequently volunteering for extra shifts. There was nothing about her demeanor that suggested anything other than a young woman committed to her vocation. It's as she was the nurse who stayed late in the face of comfort for parents navigating their worst nightmares. Yet beneath this veneer of ordinary competence, something dark was beginning to stir within the ward, hidden in the shadows of the technology meant to save tiny lives. The atmosphere of routine care fractured in June 2015 with the sudden collapse of a twin boy, baby A. He had been stable, showing every sign of progress, until life seemed to drain out of him. The medical team scrambled, their pulses racing as they performed every intervention, but the infant was gone in a heartbeat. The shock was profound. In a neonatal ward, deaths occur, but they are usually the result of predictable complications. Baby A's departure was a clinical enigma that left professionals staring at monitors that offered no explanation, wherein this tragedy was not isolated. Over the following weeks, a terrifying pattern emerged that defied the laws of probability. Infants who had been stable would suddenly crash, often during night shifts. Each time, the same denominator appeared in the nursing notes. Lucy Letby was always there, standing by the incubator, or she had just finished her turn at the bedside. The frequency of these collapses was unprecedented, turning a place of hope into a landscape of mounting dread. Senior consultants Dr. Stephen Brary and Dr. Ravi Jairam were the first to voice the unthinkable. As they reviewed the rising mortality rates, the statistical anomaly became impossible to ignore. They struggled to believe a colleague could be responsible, but the data pointed relentlessly toward Letby. Their instinct was a cold, a sinking weight, a realization that the beige nurse was the center of a storm, claiming the most innocent lives. They began to track her movements, noticing how tragedies followed her like a silent shadow. When the doctors brought their concerns to the hospital's executive leadership, they were met with institutional denial. To management, the doctors' claims were seen as a personal vendetta or an attempt to deflect blame for systemic failures. The executives dismissed the evidence as coincidence, prioritizing the hospital's reputation over the safety of the infants. They even labeled the doctor's scrutiny as bullying, demanding the consultants maintain a professional relationship with Letby. This defensive posture created a dangerous shield around her, allowing the nightmare to continue while the whistleblowers were silenced by corporate hierarchy. The lives of more infants hung in the balance. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Despite the administrative pushback, the doctors could not look away. The tension reached a breaking point when another healthy baby boy suffered a catastrophic collapse shortly after Letby took over his care. As the team fought to save him, Dr. Jairam noticed something chilling in the medical charts, a discrepancy in the recording of vital signs, and administered fluids that was physically impossible. It wasn't a mere mistake. It looked like a deliberate manipulation of the record, a digital fingerprint left behind by someone who believed they were untouchable. The Guardian was no longer just a suspect. She was a predator, and the evidence was finally starting to scream from the pages of a history no one wanted to read. The horror of the situation deepened as the methods of harm were meticulously pieced together by the consultants. It was not merely a case of neglect. It was active, calculated sabotage. Letby had discovered that the tools meant to sustain life could be turned into weapons of execution. She began injecting air into the infant's bloodstreams, creating fatal embolisms that left no external marks. In other instances, she used feeding tubes to pump excessive milk or air into their stomachs, causing their diaphragms to collapse. Perhaps most chilling was her use of insulin. Administered to a baby who did not need it, it caused blood sugar to plummet to lethal levels while remaining invisible to a casual observer. These were not acts of a panicked novice, but the work of someone who understood clinical vulnerabilities and exploited them with surgical precision. While these atrocities occurred, Letby engaged in a form of psychological warfare against her colleagues. She mastered the persona of the distraught nurse, always present during a tragedy and seemingly devastated. She would weep alongside coworkers, garnering their sympathy and positioning herself as a victim of terrible luck. This manufactured vulnerability made it almost impossible for many to suspect her. How could someone so clearly moved by these deaths be the one causing them? She craved the adrenaline of the resuscitation efforts and the attention that followed, often inserting herself into the most intense moments of a baby's final hours. She wasn't just a nurse. She was a director of grief, ensuring she was the central figure in every unfolding tragedy. The betrayal extended most cruelly to the parents. Those who stood by their infants' incubators saw Letby as a pillar of support. In their moments of despair, she was there, sometimes offering to take photographs of their dying children or bathing the small, cold bodies with a tenderness that masked a monstrous reality. She even sent sympathy cards to families on the anniversaries of their children's deaths, a gesture that appeared kind but was a haunting way to revisit the scene of her crimes. This proximity to the families provided her with a unique or twisted power, the ability to watch the impact of her handiwork while being thanked for her service. Within the hospital, the internal conflict reached a fever pitch. Despite the mounting evidence gathered by Dr. Stephen Brary and Dr. Ravi Jayaram, management remained steadfast in their defense of Letby. In an act of institutional blindness, the executives forced the consultants to attend a formal mediation session. There, the doctors were compelled to offer a written apology to the woman they believed was a predator. Management viewed the doctors' suspicions as a threat to the hospital's reputation and accused them of bullying a junior member of staff. It was a surreal inversion of justice. The whistleblowers were treated as the aggressors while the predator was protected. Eventually, the pressure became too great to ignore. In mid-2016, Letby was removed from clinical duties and reassigned to an administrative office role. However, she did not accept this sidelining quietly. Displaying a breathtaking level of audacity, she initiated a formal grievance procedure against the trust. She argued that she was being unfairly targeted and demanded to be reinstated to the neonatal unit. Remarkably, she nearly won. The hospital's internal investigation cleared her of wrongdoing, and she was on the verge of returning to the bedside of vulnerable infants. Only the steadfast refusal of the consultants who threatened to call the police kept her away. Finally, in May 2017, the Cheshire Police were called in. Operation Hummingbird was launched, and the clinical data was handed over to independent medical experts. As the investigators found what the hospital executives had ignored, a trail of evidence that pointed to a single source of chaos. In July 2018, the investigation culminated in a dawn raid on Letby's home. As officers moved through the house, they found a space filled with stuffed animals and motivational slogans on the walls. But hidden among the childhood mementos was a darker truth. They discovered hundreds of medical handover sheets, confidential documents she was never supposed to keep, meticulously organized and tucked away. It was the physical evidence of her obsession, a collection of trophies from the ward that would lead to a discovery that would change the case forever. Among the handover sheets and personal journals, investigators found something that felt like a direct transmission from a fractured soul. It was a small, yet green post-it note, cluttered with frantic handwriting. On it, Letby had scribbled words that shattered any defense of accidental tragedy. "I am evil, I did this," the note read in stark, undeniable ink. She had written that she didn't deserve to live, and that she killed them on purpose because she wasn't good enough to care for them. This wasn't just a diary entry. It was a psychological confession, a window into a mind that viewed its own darkness with terrifying clarity. This note became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case, a chilling piece of self-indictment that the defense would struggle to explain away as mere venting. The legal battle that followed at Manchester Crown Court was one of the longest and most complex in British history. For 10 months, the courtroom became a theater of forensic detail, or the prosecution presented a mountain of evidence. From rhodas showing Letby was the only person present at every collapse, to records proving infants were intentionally poisoned. Dr. Stephen Brary and Dr. Ravi Jairam stood as witnesses, their warnings finally validated. They described the physiological impossibilities they had witnessed, turning the trial into a meticulous deconstruction of a predator's methods. They revealed a pattern of death that followed Letby like a shadow across every shift she worked, leaving no room for the theory of unfortunate coincidence that management had once championed. Throughout the proceedings, Letby remained a figure of chilling composure. She sat in the dock appearing cold and detached, her beige persona still intact. Her defense team argued the neonatal unit was understaffed, and that babies died due to suboptimal care or infections. Letby herself took the stand for weeks, maintaining innocence with a soft-spoken clinical tone. She painted herself as a victim of a system looking for a scapegoat, but her lack of emotion when faced with the details of the infant's suffering deepened the sense of unease. For the families, the trial was a secondary trauma. They sat feet away from the woman they once trusted, listening as experts described the excruciating pain their children endured. They heard how their babies were injected with air, or overfed until their tiny lungs failed. After 9 months of testimony and 22 days of deliberation, the jury returned. The atmosphere was thick with silence. Lucy Letby was found guilty of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 6 others. She became the most prolific child serial killer in modern British history. When sentencing arrived, the judge did not mince words, describing her actions as a cruel, calculated, and cynical campaign of child murder. He handed down multiple whole-life orders, an absolute sentence in the United Kingdom, ensuring Letby would never breathe free air again. She would die behind bars, forever stripped of the power she had so ruthlessly exercised over the most vulnerable lives. Justice was final, but it felt insufficient for the loss. Even as Letby was led away, the ripples of her crimes continued to shake the foundations of the National Health Service. A public inquiry was launched to investigate why the warnings from the senior doctors were suppressed for so long. The failure of the hospital executives to listen to whistleblowers became a national scandal, highlighting a culture that prioritized corporate reputation over human safety. The question of why still haunts the hallways of the Countess of Chester. Was it a God complex, a twisted need for drama, or a desire for ultimate control? The final revelation was that the angel of death hadn't looked like a monster. She looked like a dedicated professional. She used her ordinariness as a cloak, operating in the light because no one could conceive of such evil in a place of healing. She remains a haunting and permanent reminder that the greatest threats are often those we are most conditioned to trust in our daily lives.